Canada just made a move that most people completely missed, but NATO, Russia, Europe, and Washington are all paying attention. This is not about tanks rolling across a border. This is not about fighter jets flying over a battlefield. This is not even about soldiers standing on the front line. This is about something far more powerful in modern warfare: money. Because in today's world, wars are not only won by armies, they are won by the countries that can finance weapons, rebuild supply chains, manufacture faster, borrow cheaper, and survive longer. And now Canada has been chosen to host the headquarters of a new NATO-linked defense, security, and resilience bank. That means Canada is no longer just sitting quietly inside the Western Alliance. Canada is being placed near the financial engine room of NATO's future security system. For years, critics called Canada weak on defense, too slow, too cautious, too dependent on the United States. But suddenly, when NATO needs a new financial machine to prepare for the next decade of global conflict, the headquarters is coming to Canada. That is not a small detail. That is a power move. The Defense, Security and Resilience Bank is not just another boring international office with flags, speeches, and diplomats shaking hands. Its purpose is much bigger. This bank is being designed to help NATO members and allied countries finance defense projects, security infrastructure, military supply chains, cyber protection, and industrial resilience. In simple words, it is meant to help countries get the money they need to build the weapons, technology, and systems required for a much more dangerous world. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one brutal truth became impossible to ignore: the West was not as ready as it thought. Ammunition stockpiles were stretched, defense factories were too slow, supply chains were too fragile. Governments suddenly realized that speeches do not stop missiles, and promises do not produce artillery shells. Money does. Factories do. Banks do. Long-term financing does. That is why this new bank matters. It is not just about helping countries spend more on defense. It is about creating a system where defense spending becomes faster, more organized, and easier to finance. And Canada being chosen to host it sends a very clear message. When NATO thinks about the future of defense financing, Canada is now part of the center of gravity. This is where the story becomes even more interesting. Canada has been under pressure for years over its military spending. American politicians, especially during the Trump era, repeatedly accused NATO allies of not paying enough for their own defense. Canada was often one of the targets of that criticism. The argument was simple: Canada benefits from NATO, Canada benefits from American protection, but Canada does not spend enough. That criticism damaged Canada's image inside the alliance. But now look at the twist. The same country that was often accused of being too soft on defense is now being trusted to host a financial institution built to help NATO strengthen its military future. That does not erase Canada's defense spending problems. It does not magically fix procurement delays, aging equipment, or questions about whether Canada can meet future NATO targets. But it changes the conversation. Canada is no longer only being judged by how many tanks it has or how quickly it can buy new jets. Canada is now being positioned as a country that can help organize the money behind the next generation of Western security. That is a different kind of power. It is quieter than military power, but sometimes it is even more important. And make no mistake, Russia will understand exactly what this means. Moscow watches NATO very carefully, not just its troop movements, but its money flows, its industrial partnerships, its weapons contracts, and its long-term plans. Russia's strategy depends partly on the belief that Western countries will get tired, divided, and financially exhausted. Putin's bet has always been that democracies argue, budgets collapse, voters lose patience, and support for Ukraine and European security slowly weakens. But a defense bank changes the equation. It signals that NATO countries are not only reacting to today's crisis, they are preparing to finance tomorrow's confrontation. This is not a short-term emergency fund. This is a structure meant to support long-term defense capacity. That matters because modern conflict is not only about who fires the first shot, it is about who can keep producing drones, missiles, vehicles, cyber systems, and ammunition month after month, year after year. Russia has shifted its economy toward war production. China is rapidly expanding its military and industrial power. Iran and North Korea are feeding instability in different regions. So, NATO is now being forced to think like an industrial alliance, not just a military alliance. And Canada hosting this bank puts it directly inside that transformation. There is also a major economic angle here for Canada. This could become more than a diplomatic win. It could open doors for Canadian banks, pension funds, defense companies, artificial intelligence firms, cybersecurity businesses, aerospace manufacturers, and small defense suppliers that want access to bigger markets. Canada has one of the most stable banking systems in the world, deep capital markets, and major financial institutions with global credibility. That is exactly the kind of environment a defense finance institution wants around it. If this bank succeeds, Canada could become a hub where money, defense strategy, and industrial policy meet. That could mean more investment, more high-value jobs, more defense innovation, and more pressure on Ottawa to take national security seriously. But there is also a warning here. Hosting the bank is not enough. Canada cannot celebrate the headline while continuing to move slowly on its own military readiness. If Canada wants to be seen as a serious defense finance hub, it also has to prove that it can build, buy, and deliver at home. Otherwise, critics will say Canada is hosting the money machine while still failing to fix its own defense house. That is the challenge for Mark Carney's government. The opportunity is huge, but so is the responsibility. The bigger picture is clear. The world is entering an era where security and economics are no longer separate. Defense is now finance. Finance is now strategy. Strategy is now survival. Countries that can fund their industries, protect their supply chains, and mobilize private capital will have an advantage. Countries that cannot will fall behind. That is why Canada's selection as host of the Defense, Security and Resilience Bank matters. It is not just another NATO announcement. It is a signal that the Western Alliance is preparing for a longer, harder, more expensive age of confrontation. Russia's war in Ukraine exposed the weakness of slow-moving defense systems. Trump's pressure on NATO exposed the political risk of depending too heavily on one country. China's rise exposed the danger of fragile supply chains. And now Canada is being placed inside the answer to all of that. The country that was once mocked for being too quiet on defense is now being handed a role in financing NATO's future. That does not mean Canada has become a military superpower overnight. But it does mean Canada has stepped into a new kind of power, the power behind the weapons, behind the factories, behind the alliance, and behind the next chapter of Western security. And in the modern world, that kind of power can be just as dangerous as any missile. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for daily updates until the next time.